evening. It is, what, 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening. Interesting time for a panel discussion. I just want to thank Mikhail. Thank you for doing what you did. There are many different through lines that we could explore, and I'm sure we will explore some. Very happy to be up here, honored to be up here with these ladies, and also want to just point out and thank the advisory board of PRISM, which includes Cece and also includes my wife Jessica Sermons. So thank you for PRISM, thank you guys for all that you do. Super looking forward to December, and I think we all have a lot to look forward to. You know, we call it Art Week. We don't call it Basel. We call it Art Week, and you know that the fact that PRISM is a part of that week and a really integral part of that week, especially for us. And I say us, is speaking for Pam, speaking for the Perez Art Museum in Miami, and looking around at this audience, I can see how that we have a lot to look forward to in December, and it's amazing to see so many people here on this Saturday evening for a chat. We're going to talk, I'm curious, I want to bring out just a little bit of your personalities and how you guys got to where you are, what you do, and then maybe segue into specifically the exhibition. We're all seeing images go by from the exhibition Queen, which ran during Prospect 4 in New Orleans. And, you know, I guess the first thing is, first of all, thank you. And how did you guys, how did you come together in the first place? How did the exhibition come together?
I think I want to start because she's the intellectual and I'm the practical one. It worked out really, really well. I had amassed a really huge collection. We had still a container actually on its way to Africa that never made it because my husband got ill, long story short. My husband got ill, I decided to keep this stuff here. So as opposed to having, you know, maybe like 250 pieces in my collection, I now suddenly had blossomed out to about 500-600 pieces. This is an enormous amount of stuff that I've been in storage, under beds, everywhere. When I got to New Orleans, I gambled on the fact that I was doing NCIS New Orleans, which its history is NCIS 1, 15 years, NCIS 2, 10 years, maybe I'll make it 7. And I accosted the president of Xavier University, Barak, after I had seen the walls of the university, which has a lot of art in certain areas and a lot of, like, very open. And I thought, this is a really wonderful idea. I invited him to lunch, very boldly. I said, you want to come to lunch? And no, not at a restaurant, at my house. And I know he was a little panicked, but he came. And as soon as he opened the door, the art starts from the door up. And he said, what on earth is this? And I said, this is why I need you to come. Because I would love to share the work that my husband and I have been collecting for these last 35, 40 years. And it would be awesome if those young up-and-coming people would get a chance just to see it. Because historically, we are not running to museums. We're not going to galleries. But in a university setting, I thought it was a free and easy place to up your, like, wow, that's really interesting. Like, oh, and I actually witnessed people on their way to work with their heavy bags suddenly stopping in this pass-through and looking at the work. So that's really how that started.
Can we pause for a minute? How did you even, I think a lot of us know you obviously from your career, and when did you become such a collector in the first place, but even an arts advocate?
Well, in Senegal, my husband really was not a lover of artists. He liked the things, you know, but he was one of those fabulous museum authorities where he would gather the things, but don't touch anything, don't look at anything, don't touch anything, you know. And I wanted to engage with people, and the art that I was seeing was very tactile, and so I started collecting things like that. And I became the procurer of the art for the museum. That's why I said an alt career of 20 years. I did almost all of the choices. I admit I was an artist myself and having great conflict, actor, artist. And I had this wonderful mentor, Stella Curran, who said, as long as you have your eyes in your hands, you can be an artist all your life. But acting, that's for the young people. And I think she was right. She really was right. And as I kept practicing the art, but the more I began to work, the more interested I became in other artists getting an opportunity. So I did food fairs at my house. I lived in a loft in a very nasty part of downtown LA, but I would have these incredible food competitions where an artist would give a piece to the best chef, so therefore people were fed and they got something beautiful. It was called the Golden Spoon Awards, of which I was very proud of. And then after I kind of moved up, I did house tours. You could come to my house and sort of go through it and I would talk about the art. So I was always docenting myself in what I had.
I think we know that a lot of the work and some of the artists that you mentioned, there is this concentration in the African diaspora. When you went to Xavier, it's one thing to find, I think, a receptive institution, but it's another thing to find a curator who has 20 some odd years in looking specifically at the African diaspora. So, sir, how did you come to the position that you find yourself in that brought you two together?
Well, I think growing up in Jamaica, I was very privileged to be able to go to the National Gallery of Jamaica and to be able to see the kind and quality of art that really has informed most of my decisions for curating. And many of my choices have been very particular in what I've chosen to curate. And I think that is also a privilege because I'm a professor, I'm able to do that. But I think that there's a magical thing to Cece and me coming together, and it's that before I think you even went to Dr. Barrett, there was an article in NOLA.com, or maybe even during, where of her apartment, and I saw the article and I saw the works in her apartment, and it was in particular that Greg Breda image with the young woman holding a purse. And it reminded me of stuff that I saw in the National Gallery of Jamaica. And I thought, well, this woman's collection is amazing, and it would be so great to have her collection at Xavier. So I think that's very important to understand that when you have those kinds of thoughts and you speak those kinds of words, that the possibility of manifesting those ideas can actually occur, right? Because here I was hoping and wishing we could work together, and here she was meeting with the president of our university, planning that to actually happen. So when we met, we hit it off. Cece's from Guyana originally, I'm from Jamaica, so we had the Caribbean connection. And then her work was really everything that I had ever dreamed of working with. I mean, it was like a Cinderella story. She had all these 600 pieces of work, and it was African diaspora. And when we started to look through the work, at Xavier, I listened to the voices of my students, and that's one of the wonderful things that informed my curatorship. And so many of my students, when I'm teaching African art, say for instance, we just spoke about Mende aesthetics. And the Mende really, their ideal woman is very, very dark skinned, and she accentuates her skin by putting shea butter all over it. And part of the beauty of the black glistening skin is that it reflects the water where the women go after their initiation, the deep, dark river water. When I talk to my students about some of these ideas, they're really surprised. They say they never heard about very, very dark black skin being beautiful, and we talk about how the intricate braiding of the Mende woman's hair is something that is also another ideal. And so for them, when they're relaying these stories to me about maybe feeling not as beautiful, maybe not appreciating the shade of their skin for a variety of reasons, and New Orleans especially has been one of those cultures that you had a different designation for every skin color. Like quadroons didn't go to octoroon balls, octoroons didn't go to mulatto balls. So we're talking about a cultural history in New Orleans that has been very stratified by skin, color, and shape. And of course it has affected many of us from the Caribbean as well as throughout the United States. But so I really initially wanted to do an exhibition that would really exemplify the beauty of very, very dark skin. You know, I had seen that documentary, Dark Girls. There's a lot of issues with skin bleaching in Africa and in Jamaica as well. So I really wanted to start to deal with some of those issues. And so I went to Cece about that, and she said, let's just make it about the beauty of black women in all of their shades. Yeah. And that's what it ended up being. And you know, really it seemed like such a simple idea, but yet the things that have grown out of it and the changes that I have seen, including the empowerment of women on our campus, just by feeling more beautiful. It really seems like such a trite thing, you know, beauty, but really, it really is a very deep, deep concept. And so I felt like in some way I could give them their images of themselves with their hair all crazy or their hair braided up, or deal with some of the issues of light skin, dark skin, and start to have those conversations.
The images are going by, so I'm wondering, was there a specific piece that you knew you had to have that was like going to be central to the thematic that you wanted to bring? Yes. And then, Cece, were you amenable to the specific work of art? Was it that specific, or was it just once you had the overall thematic, you could fill it in?
There was Venus, Birth of Oshun. Yeah, the Birth of Oshun. Yeah, so you can talk about that.
Okay, so the Birth of Oshun is a piece by Harmonio Rosales, and it was really, all of the pieces, the exhibition would have worked without it perfectly, but there was a point where we saw that piece in the LA Gallery, and I said, you know, this is the piece, because I felt that it not only modeled, and it will show up in one of these slides, you'll see it. It's modeled after The Birth of Venus by Botticelli, and The Birth of Venus was this sort of very, you know, tipping point work of art, and I feel like it so defined beauty. Birth of Oshun, right here. It so defined beauty for women in the world, you know, ever since. And when I saw The Birth of Oshun, I said, we can really work with this image. And in fact, the image, in terms of the exhibition opening even, what I did was I asked a friend of mine who's a Baba Orisha to come and play. In honor of Oshun, we did a little shrine for Oshun at the opening, and it was amazing. It turned out people started dancing to the drumming, and it turned into this really performative atmosphere, which is what I hope museum openings will be. Because, you know, traditionally, and you see this not only in Africa, but in the African diaspora, carnival and masquerade and performance and dance and movement is so much an aspect of the art. The art moves. And so sometimes I feel stifled with the art just hanging on the wall, and I feel that part of people's reaction to it should be physical and musical. And so I feel that by also taking care of the spiritual aspect of it, because here we have this image of Oshun, the goddess of love and beauty, and it was radical. It was so radical. Here we were hanging this image of this nude woman, and she was black, and she was beautiful. And I wanted my young students to see her and be in awe of her beauty. I wanted them to see, wow, she's beautiful. That means I must be beautiful too. You know, that could be the relationship. So yes, that piece I think was central to the exhibition, because it also brought in the Yoruba dynamics and the Yoruba ritual culture, which is very, very strongly felt in New Orleans and in the diaspora as a whole.
Cece, where did you get that piece? Can you tell us about that?
We sort of saw it at the same time. Not loud enough.
Loud enough, but
there's
amplified
always-
if you desire.
something.
Yep.
Absolutely. I had to announce to her that, you know, I had already bought it. It had literally just arrived. and her thing was, no, you've got to have it. You have to get it to New Orleans in time for the opening. So that's what happened. Another artist friend of mine was filming it, and I said, bring the artist and let's FaceTime. And we did it all in a very modern way. And she said, oh, I'm so pleased that you love it. And it all happened like in a half hour. It was done. I had another painting of Robert Pruitt's that I absolutely love.
Yeah, that's a central
Um,
piece as well.
What you can't see in the drawing is that there are these satellites all over the woman's dress. She's got a giant afro. She has an African mask in her head, which I will not declare is Dogon because
There it is, there's a piece.
the lines are incorrect, but I didn't know that Robert knew this. But the fact that he had chosen the satellite pieces, she seemed like a contemporary Dogon woman to me who believed in the dog star, that was the origin of that community. And I was just blown away by this accidental putting together of this particular black woman. So that was what was fascinating about it for me. And as much as I tried to persuade Sarah that she was the one, Venus kind of galvanized everyone and got it together. This is Katrina that's going by very quickly, and I was also very moved by her innocence, done by a Spanish artist, Sonia Fay, and she is sitting in water. Her shoes are off. The plug, the outlet is twisted, and she's just sitting there waiting, holding her cat. And I thought it was a very poignant picture painting there.
There were so many major pieces in this. That was one of the things that made it so great, was every time you turned the corner, there was a piece that you were just struck by. Not only for I think the exceptional abilities of the painter and the artist, but the conceptual ideas and the history behind those pieces were very complex as well.
I think I'm also fascinated by the storytelling of the painting, which obviously we're getting away from in Afrofuturism and this very, very contemporary idea of what we're doing and how we're seeing things in the world and how we're relating to this kind of all-encompassing art world. And I'm just delighted that I had to have these paintings because at one time I could only collect that in reference to the museum. Now that I'm a freer gatherer, things have changed.
I think that's really fascinating, especially in the context of probably a lot of budding collectors. It's a range of artists and degrees of commercial experience, etc. I see Alison Saar going by. But that first image in Harmonia Rosales, that first piece, right? Not necessarily a household name of an artist. How did you even find the work? I think there are a lot of artists that you've mentioned that anybody could probably either heard of or could find in a gallery with some relative ease. But how do you go about?
Well, first of all, I knew her gallery. It's Melanie Meloche, and I knew that gallery.
Okay.
I am constantly looking for what new African American or African heritage artists were doing. Only because, as I have so much in one particular area, I decided not to spread too thin. If I'm in love with an artist's work and I see a piece, it doesn't matter whether she's from Yugoslavia, Iceland, or here. It's my personal piece, but I'm shopping for the future of a body of work that has a context that goes somewhere in particular, because that's how I started. And so I did 25 years of that kind of collecting for the museum. So to stop it now and change it midstream, I think would be very difficult.
And Sarah, as far as your area of study and that idea of the diaspora, is that something that is part of Xavier's mission as far as it goes, or how does that work for you?
Oh, definitely. I'm in a really great place at Xavier. Being at an HBCU, there's, at least at Xavier, I can't speak for all HBCUs, but there's very little pushback if you are Afrocentric or if you are always constantly talking about African or traditional religions of Africa or connecting things to politics that affect Black people all over the world or the African diaspora. So because it is an HBCU, because the majority of our students, so we have a pretty diverse student population at this point. We have a large number of Vietnamese students, and we have a number of students that are from Europe, Russia, Ukraine, but predominantly black. Xavier's predominantly black. So I can be in a classroom and I can be talking about these kinds of ideas, and it will be, it's very much, the students are like, it's like a breath of relief for them to hear this information. They do not, some of them do not know what kente cloth is or cowrie shells are. I know those kind of are these signifiers, but it's just to be able to introduce them to these things that are part of their African history because they're of African ancestry. And for them also to hear a story that goes beyond slavery, before slavery. You know, that you know, there was a story and traditions and history and rituals that occurred in Africa and still occur throughout the African diaspora. They have not been lost. They were maintained, and they were maintained in very radical ways. And so we talk about sometimes how, like, when hair is being braided, when people were escaping from slavery, sometimes those worked as maps for people to be able to find their way. How drums, we had a Shango festival for, we had a winter music festival when I first got there, and I did a Shango festival for Shango's birthday. And we talked about, we had a whole lecture on bata drumming and drums, and how drums were a form of speaking, of language, you know, of coding, of sending messages from plantation to plantation. So Xavier really supports me in those. There's never any pushback when I want to keep doing those kinds of, you know, functions programming, which I feel are absolutely necessary for our students to feel empowered and strong.
Tell us just a little bit more about some of the other work in the exhibition. We talked about central images and this idea of you guys coming together and agreeing this is about womanhood. I see Vicki Thomas going by right here. Can you just flesh out a couple more of those pieces, perhaps? Want to talk about making pieces?
Kehinde Wiley called me up and said, I've got a friend, you need to go and buy him work. Okay. And the pieces that I really wanted were massive. By the time I got there were just these really huge pieces left. And she was at Sue Velmeyer's gallery, I had to say her name correctly. But there was this last piece of this boxing series that she had for the boxers. And at the time, I was working on a small collection of paintings, not specifically made out of paint. So I had a series that I wanted to show in my home called It Ain't Just Paint. And I had profiles made out of tortilla chips. I had paintings made out entirely of cloth, not quilting. And this seemed to be very appropriate. And so this is how I actually acquired Vicki Thomas. Now, since then, you know, we've become friends, and it's a whole other story. And it's amazing the leap that she has made in terms of the things that she is now showing, and the portraiture and the influence of her mother. And it's just really dynamic and changed a whole lot. So this is my luck. I am at, for the most part, at the beginning of an artist's burgeoning career. It's just like they just left off the second floor, tier of the swimming pool, and now they're all in the high dive section. Too high for me. I'm very pleased to have been part of their elevation.
It's such an interesting entry point with that piece in particular, right? Because at first you have this attraction to the material, and you have a context that you're thinking of very specifically for that material. But then there's that, I think the clincher is, if Kehinde says buy the painting. And Sarah, is there another piece in the exhibition that you feel like is part of that?
Yes, and it's Kehinde's piece.
Yeah.
And it's a piece that is not easily recognized as his because it is one of his maybe earliest pieces, which again, you know, my grandfather was a collector as well, and I would say that you know, if you love something, now collect it. You know, just collect what you love, and you will never know in the future what, but just in the act of collecting, you are supporting that artist. And that is a way of giving and manifesting a future for that artist. So don't only look for things that, you know, are by famous artists or that are of value, because when Cece was collecting these pieces, many of these artists weren't yet famous. And look at them now. The Kehinde Wiley piece is It's like a drawing with some painting. It's like collage, and half of the face is a brown paper bag, which, if you know some of the history of New Orleans, you know there was this brown paper bag test to get paper sack brown, where you had to get, in order to get into certain social aid and pleasure clubs, you had to be able to pass that test. You had to be the color of the brown paper bag or lighter, right?
I see nodders over there.
Right? So for me, this was, not only was it an early Kinde Wiley piece, not only was it, you know, very different from what we know of his work now, but it also spoke to the history of New Orleans. And my students, I could use this piece and talk about that history. And art that I can use to talk about cultural and social history is very important to me. That's usually the kind of art that I'm attracted to and I want to curate.
Yeah. Tell us a little something about the context. I mean, you bring up New Orleans and specific histories around that. There also was the context of Prospect, of an exhibition, a biennial or triennial type of exhibition that I think has chosen to embrace the cultural standpoint of New Orleans and proceed with the idea that the aesthetic of that show should be somewhat in line with an exhibition like yours. Was that something that was, you know, how did that come about in the collaborative process? And obviously it seems like, you know, I've read about the wonderful reception for the exhibition. So obviously,
I want to speak on it because she would be forced to be modest. Because, quite honestly, it became the show.
Yeah.
It was not part of, like, oh, they're going to put up this incredible exhibition, and you should go and see that and include it in part of your touring around.
It was just a satellite.
It was a satellite show. It was at a university with university hours. And yet the word of mouth got through. Nothing to do with my name, quite honest. It was the fact that, first of all, the poster was brilliant of Oshun. And then the word of mouth just went through the town very, very swiftly. And we ended up having a marvelous group of visitors from many institutions. The Hammer came, Studio Museum of Harlem came, CAM came, and it just opened up the possibilities even for the university, who I think thought they were doing a nice little show, and now suddenly they were in the limelight and had to come up as well. And I think of all the things, that has been the gift that the works have done. Yeah.
You moved to New Orleans, what was it, 6, 7 years ago?
Yeah, I'm in the 5th season, so 6 years.
Speak about the place a little bit. I mean, I know there's obviously the work, but also from your background and from your interests, I think there's a lot of precedents, obviously.
Yeah, I was very slow on New Orleans. I didn't like it. Too many potholes.
Yeah.
Too
Lots of
hot.
potholes.
Walk around with your liquor in your hand and broad one salacious drive-through daiquiris. I mean, my mother would say, "What kind of bad behavior?" I have a hard time adjusting. You know, from my little English background, you know, little colonial girl was like, "Is this, you know, fun?" My assistant came with me and said, "I like it. It reminds me of Guyana." I said, "We don't drink in the streets." He said, "No, but in the evening time, you know, whatever." But he said, "No, it's just the trees, the friendliness, people approach you, you know, you're lost. They don't say, oh, it's down that way." He said, "Okay, wait a minute, let me show you." That kind of thing is still happening there. And it's, I told them it was like a pair of socks. As they came up your leg, you kind of got that warm and comfy feeling. And so it did take a while for me. Now what I see is a bit of fantasy and a bit of reality. It needs help. It needs artists. It needs institutions. It needs an alternative way of educating its people. And I'm very bold about the opportunity that I have to meet the mayor before, the mayor to come. And when they constantly say, "So how do you like our city?" And I tell them, because the potential of the city is spectacular. And it's like one of those places where if you retired and you were still bored, you should go and ingest your information into a city like this. It's absolutely fascinating. It has a lot to offer. It just doesn't know how to do it. And the people who are doing it is a small amount of people who have held on to the doing for years and years and years and don't even understand what it is that they have because they don't trust it. And therefore, they avoid that element of their entire city. It's very, very odd. But as an observer and an outsider and somebody who's really looking, it has a magnificent potential.
I think we can relate.
Sounds like
It's, and that also, I mean, that makes me think of that context of in which you're working, Sarah, and that, like, in a way, you could say New Orleans, Miami, these two cities kind of don't look like the others, right? They don't look like your average
We
American
need to
city.
become sister cities.
I completely agree.
Yeah, something, a kind of exchange that would really help both of the cities to grow.
Makes perfect sense.
Well, there's a lot of similar elements. I think both cities are the Northern Caribbean, you know. I think that they are very different from the United States on a whole. Most people who come to New Orleans or Miami feel very strongly, they're like, this is not like anywhere else I've been in the States. I think both cities also have a very strong African diaspora culture because they are the Northern Caribbean. And then I think also both cities are very magical. I think that in both cities you have, like in Jamaica, you go to the doctor and he gives you the medicine for your headache, and then my grandmother will rub the bay rum on my head and, you know, do a couple things. So there's an element also too of, and in the South in general, of, you know, these traditional ritual practices of healing and caring and loving and those kinds of things that I think are very healing for people of the African diaspora because they really reach back again to traditional African rituals. But I do feel like you know, both cities are very global.
When did you arrive?
Arrived
In New Orleans?
in New Orleans. I came to New Orleans when I was writing my dissertation because I was in Iowa, and I had been in Iowa for a while. And I'm from Jamaica, and at a certain point I'm like, I'm writing about the African diaspora, I need to be in the African diaspora. So I didn't have a job or anything, I just showed up, you know, and started writing and got a couple, I started working in galleries and all my jobs had to do with art. And New Orleans works that way. This is when I was in my 20s, so about 20 years ago. And I made all kinds of connections on Julia Street in the galleries and with Noma and with Xavier. And then I left because of Katrina. And I was kind of disembodied for, I would say, 6 or 7 years outside. I really didn't settle. I lived in Brooklyn, I lived in Iowa again, I lived in New Jersey. We moved around a lot and we were not settled. And we decided to return because everywhere else I went flooded, by the way. So I was like, I said to my husband, I was like, hey, if everywhere else is gonna flood, let's just go back to where we belong. You know, because I was really afraid because of Katrina, what had happened. And I ended up going back the day that we left. It was not planned that way. It was August 28th, I think. It was the day right before Katrina. I drove right back into New Orleans. It was raining like crazy. And I started crying, and I realized that I hadn't been truly, truly happy. You know, I needed to be in that swampy, hot, humid, you know what I'm talking about, right? Because you live in it. And so when I came back, we struggled for a while doing different jobs and stuff, and every day I drove past Xavier. I had like a 9 to 5 where I had to clock in and clock out. I was still a curator. And I got a call, and every day I drove by Xavier and I said, I really want to work there. And I literally got a call one day and said, we need an adjunct. And what I ended up doing was going into my job at 6 o'clock in the morning, leaving at 3:30, going to Xavier, teaching 2 classes. And everyone's like, you're crazy, you have like 4 kids and you're working like 16 hours a day. And I said, because I really want to work here. And that's what happened. So that's, then I stayed, I realized what they had.
Shall we open it up?
Yeah.
that you went back? What year?
So I went back 2011. 2011. Yeah.
Before we ask any more questions, I think we should turn the fan on for 3 minutes. Shout over the gas. I think it's going to make a huge difference. Great power.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's next? What's the next exhibition?
So, Sarah called me and she said, well, it's so popular, it feels a little unfair that it was only women.
Okay.
So, I wanted to do It Ain't Just Paint, which I truly believe is a powerful, creative show that shows people that you can have anything. And this was because I lived in Africa. I could see, you could pick up almost any material and they will create.
So we can hear you over the fan?
Is that better? Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. And I wanted to do that, but Sarah felt we should be an equalizer. So the next show is on Black masculinity. And she is also plumbing from my collection. Which is shocking, because I remember my husband saying, if you bring one more woman in this house, I'm sick of it. And I must have subconsciously started collecting men. So I have a good enough collection of men that we have a show. And then after that, it will be It Ain't Just Paint, which I think is a fantastic creative show, because I'm always thinking of very young people.
So will that be at
That would be
Xavier?
great. Back at Xavier.
She says I'm terribly spoiled now. Because I'm always like, we need this piece and we need that piece.
Will the show, either shows ever come to Miami?
Okay, so the question is, will these shows ever come to Miami? Was that your question also?
That was my question.
Any power over that? I'll come back to Miami. I'll stay here again.
That's what we want.
We will be exploring that.
I see you.
All right, thank you. I'm curious as to approximately, how many of the works in Queen were by Black female artists versus artists of
There's
other male or other races?
There were not too many other races, but I think definitely there are more male than female. There were more female African artists, and there were more male American and diaspora artists. But then I see their men.
Yeah. And it just goes to show you though that loving and appreciating the beauty of Black women is not just Black women loving and appreciating the beauty of Black women, but it's a global thing, and that's another thing that I think is important about this.
It's actually an interesting question, although I don't really think it has to do as much with how many males, how many females. It's just the fact that the female artist is also part of upcoming and growing notice. They're being noticed now. Simone Blay, I'm going to say this. Shabba-la-la-la-la-la. Amy Schrock. There are lots of them. Lisa Butler. There are going to be a lot of female artists. And here's a name that I want you to find when you see it. Kine Ao. Amazing artist. And that's part of the African diaspora we're willing to spread. Yes. But may I say something? Yes.
But also too, we have a really amazing female artist coming to the press soon. Is that right, Ebony?
Oh, yes, November 8th.
Ebony Patterson, right? Jamaica, Daddy, right?
November 8th, please.
November
Ebony
8th. So she's coming to this town. So please make sure everybody go and see her work. If you're in New Orleans, Lena Victor is at the New Orleans Museum of Art. Also major, amazing artist. So, take a trip, come visit us.
I've been fortunate enough to be at Tea Prospect. So when I see art in New Orleans, I see
all kinds of people going to see the art. With this show, have you had success with getting a diverse group of people to see this show? By that I mean those that are not of our same backgrounds, or have you mostly gotten people who are diasporic, and does it matter?
That's an interesting question, only because it was at Xavier, there was an element of African Americanness there. But because it was Prospect, there was also the open element of art lovers. And so Xavier benefited from a rather large audience that I don't think it would normally have.
And honestly, the Studio Museum wrote to us. They wrote to us, and the Hammer Museum, and they asked. They were coming with donors and trustees. Like 25 people came, and the Hammer came with 12. And they're coming from all over the world, all over the United States. And then if you just think of the Prospect crowd, so because of Prospect, we really got an international, very global, multicultural crowd. We also got a lot of people from the community of New Orleans. The community that is coming to Xavier is predominantly Black. The community that is at Xavier is also young people who are predominantly Black. Frankly, that was, part of my goal, because what I wanted was my students to see images of themselves. And the reason why that was so important for me was the first exhibition that I did was by a Haitian artist, Gilbert Jean-Pierre, and he does these enormous paintings of the Haitian Revolution. And when we did that exhibition, so many people, I'm talking like the custodians and the guys in building service and everybody, administration, came to me and said to me, this guy looks like my uncle. This guy looks like my dad. And they would also say in the very next breath, I've never seen a painting that looks like my family before. So for me, I have a very specific agenda.
And is that what's most important to you during at a university? Is it giving something to the body of that university? Is that your?
Yes. For me, I'm a professor. I'm a curator. I also because I studied African arts, and because I grew up in Jamaica, and we had like Rex Nettleford and the National Dance Theatre Company. All of these are ways to give my students different options for agents of social control other than the media, right? It's all imagery now, right? But I want to give them something that has more substance to it. And so for me, that's pretty much part of what I'm doing.
I think for me it turns out to be slightly different, because I've been collecting African art with a purpose, not to educate necessarily for students to look at themselves and go, that's me, but because I was in Africa. There were the paintings. I collected those. And after 30 years, suddenly we're in the limelight. And therefore, I am now a source of something that was originally meant for the diaspora. That really was my goal, was that Africa could see what her children had done around the world. We were bringing that work back to Africa. And it was a great pleasure for me. Now it's turned into a completely different gift, and it keeps reinventing itself and becoming other things. I just want to say before we run out of any kind of time, because of this show, I forged ahead and decided to work on private collections in public spaces. I spoke to the Hammer, I spoke to Cam. This has never been done before, where they don't expect the collection to be inherited by the museum. But I'm saying it's an incredible opportunity to teach, to share with a much larger audience who could become collectors themselves if they had the opportunity to see this kind of work. And no, I don't want the Hammer to inherit all of it, because, we're trendy and we'll be fabulous for about 15, 20 years, and then I'll be in the basement of the Hammer. So I'm trying to work on an idea where it's acceptable to have it in the Hammer temporarily as a special program. And then it comes back to me so that it can go. I want it to travel the world. I want it to be seen in Africa again. I want it to be seen in the Caribbean. And that's what I'm working on in this book. Crazy.
So I'm interested a little bit more in your next show, Black Masculinity. I guess it's a two-part question. Are you looking to explore themes of like homophobia, transphobia, patriarchy, misogyny within that body of work? And I guess what are you looking to explore within that diaspora? And I guess the next part is what do you look for? What are the guidelines in putting a show together with such a sort of heavy topic?
Okay, so the question, just so everybody can hear, was about the next show on Black masculinity and exploring ideas about homophobia and trans identities within that context.
Catholic University.
It is a Catholic university, however, that didn't stop me from putting the birth of Oshun naked right in the middle of it. You know, I think that's a great question. The show is called Icons, Ideals of Black Masculinity. And when Franklin and I were speaking briefly on Friday afternoon, I spoke about the wrestler. It'll show in a minute the Mickalene Thomas image, because I'm actually going to also use that image in the Icons show as well. So that image, which is of a woman wrestler, I feel embodies aspects of Black masculinity. And by putting it in both exhibitions, I'm really wanting to start to play with this kind of identity politics, to really have people ask questions. Here she is. So to really have people ask questions, and part of that was from a colleague of mine who said, well, you're doing Black masculinity, are you including women? You know, and I said, well, you know, I have a perfect painting. It was used in the Queen show. It might be a kind of radical act to use it also in this show. You know, the idea that it will be used in both shows. So she's both a queen, you know, a beautiful Black queen, and then she's also embodies ideas about Black masculinity as well. There are a number of images. Oh, Ebony Patterson's image also we're using. What is it? And it shows the bleaching of the skin, but it also, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she really does talk about dance hall and sort of the idea of Black male flamboyance too, right? And how dance hall becomes this space. And you know, this is a very traditional, if you look at traditional African masquerade, there are so, I mean, I'm teaching that right now. It's usually only the realm of men, right? The men, they are the few women that actually wear masquerade costumes within traditional African society. And men are often, in many ways, performing as women in you know, very, like, there's a performativity of femininity in which they're producing ideas about ideal feminine roles. But I also talk about it as a way of expressing the feminine divine within themselves, right? Because there are feminine divinities as well. Like if your head is ruled by Oshun in Yoruba, the idea in Ifa, the idea is that you will have aspects of Oshun's femininity as well. So some of those ideas are being incorporated into the next show. So yes.
All right. Anyone else? Thank you all. Thank you, Wendy Francois, thank you so much. And all of us will be there in December, right?